Greetings from the International Labour Organization and its cooperatives unit, where we are commemorating our centenary. And on this occasion, we have initiated a series of interviews with cooperative leaders, practitioners, researchers from around the world. And this ILO COOP 100th interview series is continuing today with Mr. Martin Lowery, who is a cooperative leader in the US and an ICA board member. Welcome, Martin. Thank you for joining.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Sunil. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm honored. Thank you.
Could you tell us about how you got started with working with cooperatives, Martin?
Oh, I'd be happy to. I have kind of a fun answer to that one, in that when I was at university, we created a worker cooperative to publish a newspaper. It was an independent newspaper. It was in the late 1960s, which was a period of quite a bit of upheaval, particularly in the United States. And that newspaper survived for 4 years. And I had long since graduated from university, and I received a patronage capital check in the mail, which
wow.
Was a vindication of the choice to make it a worker cooperative. And then I got involved with electric cooperatives for most of my career. That came about in an interesting way. I finished a PhD in philosophy, which actually led me to be very interested in ethical values and principles. And I was doing some work with a consultancy with the Department of Energy, and it was during the Jimmy Carter administration, President Jimmy Carter, when conservation and energy efficiency was a primary effort of utilities. And we did some work within the utility industry, the electric utility industry, and that's how I came to discover electric cooperatives specifically.
You worked, you mentioned, with the electric cooperatives, in fact, with the National Rural Electric Cooperative Association for more than 30 years.
That's right.
Could you tell us a little bit about the role of electric cooperatives in rural development and energy security in the US?
Of course. In fact, for many viewers, I think this is coming as a surprise that there is a very strong and significant electric cooperative sector in the United States. And the reason for that is that most of the rural United States was unserved going into the 1930s and even into the 1940s, meaning no electric service whatsoever. You literally did not have electricity. And you can imagine the quality of life issue associated with that. So there was a major effort, starting primarily in 1935, of a public-private partnership with the United States government in creating electric cooperatives around the country. So farmers and ranchers would come together and they would decide that they could make this work. There was a lot of training and education that went on. There were low interest loans that were given by the government and some loan guarantees. And today, about 60% of the entire country has service by electric cooperatives as opposed to investor-owned companies. The economic development side of this is very important. So electricity in many ways is a means to an end. It's not an end in and of itself. So you think about all of the consequences today of how electric service helps with water quality, with telemedicine, teleeducation, and basically agricultural production. With electricity, as we know in the developing world, there are lots of issues around successful agricultural production. So once you have electric service, you now have economic growth. So the public-private partnership continues to this day. And I would argue that the rural United States would be in a very problematic place today if it hadn't been for cooperative electrification.
Consumer cooperatives are also quite prominent in the US, especially in urban communities. Is that not so?
Well, that's true. And we would consider actually the electric cooperatives to be consumer.
As part of, right.
They're owned by the consumer.
Users, yeah.
And so, but then you can add to that credit unions as consumer cooperatives,
right.
grocery or food cooperatives as well.
Right.
And I would say today in the United States, the consumer cooperative is the primary driver of cooperative, along with agriculture. But we are also seeing worker cooperatives develop relatively quickly.
Right. And in the context of local economic empowerment of disadvantaged communities, again, this cooperative idea seems to be seeing a comeback among immigrants, among African Americans, among self-employed platform economy workers.
All true, all true. I served on the board of the National Cooperative Business Association for many years. In fact, I was chairman of the board, and that organization today, which is the apex organization in the US, is really driving toward that idea of an inclusive economy using cooperation. And as we know around the world, and particularly for us in the United States, the pandemic has shown how serious the problem is in terms of gaps, particularly with minority groups, African Americans, Hispanics. It's a significant problem, haves and the have-nots, and we are seeing a renaissance of cooperative growth based on the disparities that we're seeing and the need for people to be able to meet their needs locally through cooperative membership.
You mentioned the growing inequalities in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. And of course, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals are very much about addressing some of these global inequalities, reducing poverty, leaving no one behind. Could you tell us a little bit about the role of cooperatives in contributing toward advancing the Sustainable Development Agenda 2030?
Most definitely. So the first thing I would say is that the ICA itself has taken the Sustainable Development goals very seriously, and we're looking at all of them because cooperatives, in fact, can address most, if not all, of the goals, given the range of cooperatives and the type of sectors that we have. I think also in the context of the ILO, when we look at decent work and the future of work, the Sustainable Development Goals that relate to inequalities, gender inequality, role of youth, the future of work, and then, as you mentioned a minute ago, the platform economy, the digital transformation, those are all that cooperatives can make a significant contribution to. And I would argue that in particular, when you look at the cooperative principles and values, and maybe the values themselves, they fit very directly into the hopes that we have around achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. So you look at self-help, self-responsibility, democracy, equity, equality, solidarity. All of those goals you can find in the Sustainable Development Goals themselves, or I should say all of those values are in the Sustainable Development Goals themselves. So I believe cooperatives have a very significant role to play. And it's an issue for the ICA, I believe, of communication and education. One that I think we should be addressing is that day-to-day business can take you away from keeping your eye on the prize, so to speak. And if we can think of the Sustainable Development Goals as partly aspirational and partly very concrete approaches to making a better world, you can begin to incorporate that into your day-to-day business as a cooperative. And I think the responsibility of the ICA to try to encourage that type of communication within all cooperative sectors.
You are on the board of the International Cooperative Alliance, and I was wondering if you could tell us about the strategic vision of the international cooperative movement in getting cooperatives recognized as critical social and economic and environmental also actors.
Of course. Let's start with the 2020 to 2030 strategic plan that has now been published on the website of the ICA. There are really four pillars, let's call them, cooperative identity, which I'd like to talk about a little bit further, cooperative growth, which we already mentioned in terms of the potential of cooperatives to make a greater difference on the very difficult issues we face around the world. Cooperative development, which in itself is one that I'm very interested in, particularly, let's say in sub-Saharan Africa, where you have so many people who have the need for basic services that are simply not there. And then maybe most importantly, the global cooperative network. If cooperatives around the world would see themselves as a network of actors that also have important relationships with the ILO, the UN overall, the World Food Program, and so on. This is a very powerful idea, that an active network of that type working on socioeconomic problems can have a really significant impact in the world. That then leads to the point about the social and solidarity economy and the work UN is doing in that area with the ultimate goal of publishing a resolution around the importance of the social and solidarity economy and the role that cooperatives can play. And there, the ILO and the ICA need to work in lockstep around recommendation 193 so that it is specifically and clearly included in the UN resolution. So we're definitely believers in the idea that cooperatives are a part of a larger social and solidarity economy with a shared value system where we can work together in partnerships that will leverage our capabilities to an even greater extent.
And you wanted to elaborate a little bit more on the cooperative identity for us?
I do. We had a committee of the ICA in past years on the cooperative principles. And as a result of that, and that was under the leadership of Jean-Louis Vincel, Crédit Coopératif in France, who is now head of Cooperatives Europe as well. And under his leadership, we published the guide notes on the cooperative principles that are available also through the ICA website. And it's a very detailed discussion of the 7 cooperative principles. More recently, we evolved from the Cooperative Principles Committee to the Cooperative Identity Committee. And the reason for that is that in 1995, on the 100th anniversary of the ICA, we were able to create for the first time the Statement on Cooperative Identity, which included the definition of the cooperative as an autonomous organization, the principles, and the values, as I mentioned earlier. Those values also contain the ethical values of openness, honesty, and caring for community and social responsibility, all of which I think ring very true today. So that package, the Statement on Cooperative Identity, that was approved by the General Assembly 25 years ago, becomes the foundation for every cooperative to be able to talk about who they are, why they exist, and why it is important for many institutions around the world to recognize that. So a lot of what will be happening next now is looking at an educational program around the Statement on Cooperative Identity. And we will hopefully touch as many institutions around the world as we can in order to make more visible the importance of cooperatives. Identity for all of us is a very meaningful thing, right? Each of us has a self-identity. So that sense of the identity and purpose of a cooperative that is commonly shared around the world will be very helpful to meeting the strategic goals that I mentioned around growth, development, and the creation of a global network.
You mentioned the future of work. You mentioned the pandemic, the changes that are happening rapidly around us. Could you tell us a little bit about the role cooperatives can play in mitigating and adapting to these big changes, in some cases, crises?
There is a lot to talk about on the impact of the pandemic, and I'm one of those who believes that we do not go back to a past point in time we go forward, and the lessons that we're learning around the pandemic, I believe, are permanent lessons. We talked earlier about gaps in income, gaps in wealth, gaps in healthcare. All of those gaps, as was mentioned, can be dealt with to some extent through cooperative approaches and cooperative solutions. But I think maybe more importantly, we need to look at a permanent alteration of how we live on this planet as a result of what the COVID virus has taught us. Potentially affects every human being on Earth. It will affect migration patterns that are already problematic. It will affect the way we think about delivering health services, about how our children are educated. We've seen very clearly that the lack of high-speed telecommunications in urban areas because of the lack of ability to pay for them, in rural areas because there is no infrastructure, are having a very deleterious impact on poorer people, on people who do not have the means, and they will fall further and further behind. We also can look at the future of work from the point of view of the digital transformation as perhaps already being upon us. That virtual work is perhaps a very significant part of our future that the pandemic is showing us. I have a son-in-law who was with us for the past couple of weeks where we did the testing and became a pod as an extended family. He actually changed jobs while he was with us, never met the staff face-to-face, never met his boss face-to-face, but was able to interview and successfully get a job in Los Angeles while he was with us in Washington. And Washington, D.C., and then went back to Los Angeles to begin his virtual work with his new company. That is very likely a significant part of the future of work. Well, now we can ask, how well trained are people to be able to handle a virtual situation? What does that say about the future of our education system? So all of this, I think, will be very interesting from the point of view of how cooperatives themselves adapt and can be a foundational component to a successful quality of life for all of us in the future.
And we are seeing a lot of young people picking up discovering the cooperative idea in this time, no? You talked a number of times, you mentioned the United Nations organizations in general and the International Labour Organization in particular. Could you tell us what you think is the role of these UN agencies vis-a-vis the cooperative movement and cooperative development?
I'd like to do that in a context that perhaps will be a bit of a surprise. And as you think about UN peacekeeping forces and the role of the UN has had in conflict resolution, there is a way to begin to think about a broader role, which we talk about within the ICA as the concept of positive peace. That negative peace is the fact that you can send in the bluebonnet troops and they keep the peace, which means that you're keeping conflict from getting totally out of control. How about the opposite of that, of positive peace, where you're working to create an environment in locales and regions that actually removes that tension, remove what we call structural violence, and instead creates an environment of inclusiveness and harmony. I think that there ought to be a way to think about the UN and its institutions and its relationship with other bodies, including cooperatives, to look at ways that we can encourage positive peace, that we can do things that might seem impossible today when you look at certain areas of the world where conflict continues to be primary. We've seen that in places around the world, and I've learned this from some of the ICA board members in Colombia, for example, in Nepal, and that there is an opportunity for cooperatives to play an important grassroots role in not only conflict resolution, but in creating that positive peace environment. And the United Nations, in its relationship with the ICA, I think could have a very important role to play. I know that already occurs, but I'm talking about elevating its visibility and trying to flip from controlling a conflict situation to removing the structural impediments to positive peace around the world.
Yes, through its international development work, the UN agencies are working on that, and we have firsthand, as at the ILO, been involved in working in rebuilding war-torn communities,
right.
while utilizing cooperatives as cornerstones of local institutions, local economic and social institutions. For instance, in northern Sri Lanka, this is a recent experience. I guess the question is, how do we get cooperatives as central actors into that development programming or development
well,
agenda?
that's back to the points, Mill, in terms of having one of our 4 pillars in the strategic plan being cooperative development.
Network, yeah.
We have worked with the EU over the past 5 years on building the capacity for cooperative development. There was a grant that we received through the Commission. That 5-year program has opened up a lot of avenues of thinking as to how our work can be better done. I myself have been involved in development through the electric cooperatives because my organization, National Rural Electric Cooperative Association, has an international arm. In fact, President John F. Kennedy, who personally asked us to get involved in bringing electrification to rural areas around the world. So we've been doing this since 1962. A major day is on sub-Saharan Africa. We've worked throughout Latin America, major projects in Bangladesh and the Philippines. And of course, as I talked earlier, electricity is a means to an end. So when you're bringing electrification to rural Bangladesh, you're also helping in all different areas. The World Bank, in fact, did a study a number of years ago showing the impact on girls' education, water quality, sanitation, and now telecommunications. The critical need to make sure that we have high-speed telecommunications infrastructure throughout the world. The development work, I think, is really, really important, but also from the point of view of making sure that this institution building, not just infrastructure build-up. If we're simply doing infrastructure, then that can fall apart as soon as you finish the project.
Right.
If you're building institutional capabilities at the local level, and in particular, community-based organizations like cooperatives, with a governance structure at the local level that is inclusive and that people believe in, now what you leave behind is sustainable for the long term. And I think that there's been a lot of debate over the years about how to do development well. And I think one of the great lessons we've learned is you don't do the development yourself, you enable people. And that enabling process is the only road to sustainability.
And you don't do it alone, but also do it in partnerships as your 4th pillar of the strategy, the global network.
And let me comment on that if I could, because around the world you see too often organizations that are working in one area only, when in fact, if you had that crossover in healthcare, telecommunications, education, electrification, so on, if folks together within a region, you'd not only create a non-redundant capability, but you would also get things done in a much more efficient manner. And in that regard, the donor agencies around the world could do a lot in terms of interaction, interagency planning, to achieve exactly that. And the problem is, you look within a country, a government will typically be dividing all of that, separating it out. So we have healthcare area, education in another, infrastructure in another, and even within that governmental functioning, you need to find ways to have interagency planning, and then that planning needs to go to the broader institutional capabilities at the level of the EU.
In fact, you mentioned how the rural electric cooperatives had this international development functions, activities, but many national cooperative organizations have a development NGO. The NCBA has the CLUSA, Sweden has Swedish Cooperative Movement has WeEffect, COOP in Italy has Coopermundo, so this is quite common, isn't it? Yeah.
And in fact, as we were working through that 5-year program with the EU support, we actually moved in that direction. So there is now a permanent networking capability around the cooperative development organizations, and we're getting to know much better.
Cooperatives for Development, the platform. That's a great initiative, and it's now on your board as well as a committee. Thank you so much, Martin. This was very interesting, hearing your insights and experiences. Any final words you would like to share with us for ILO COOP 100, or anything for future cooperators, anything you would like to share in conclusion?
I would, yes, thank you, Sunil, and thank you for the opportunity to do this interview. First of all, I would re-emphasize the critical importance of the ILO and the co-op unit in thinking about the future of work and the dignity of work in a way that we might not have imagined we would be thinking about due to the circumstance we're in globally today. And having said that, I would wish the ILO a happy 100th, and hopefully another 100, another centenary, and specifically for this year, the co-op unit, happy 100th. And I hope that our working relationship will continue. I know it will, but I see so many more opportunities that we can share together. So much appreciated, and congratulations on birthday of the co-op unit, and then for last year, the birthday of the ILO as its centenary.
And as you said, onward and upward, we can only build on this important partnership between the ILO and the international cooperative movement. So we thank you for your time and your thoughts, and look forward to seeing you in better times.
Onward and upward. So.
Upward.
Okay.
Thank you, Martin. Bye-bye.